Well, a warm welcome to this talk. It's Thursday, the 14th of March. Now, there's been a letter written by a group of 55 leading British academics, mostly professors, to the Hallett COVID inquiry in my country, pointing out deficiencies in it, and that's what I want to look at today. Now, there's 55 academics have signed this. I personally know about another 55 who would happily have signed it. So I think this is just a token of British academia expressing grave concerns about this inquiry, which really, quite frankly, I consider it farcical. But they actually put it in much better terms than me, so I'm going to look at it in a little bit of detail. Probably take about 10 minutes to go through it. But let's see what they've been saying. So now this is the headline here. COVID inquiry appears fundamentally biased, say scientists. Now that's the headline from the newspaper. So let's look at the actual letter and see what we make of it ourselves. There's the references. Now that first reference there, that gives you the full letter. You can download it. It's available in different sorts of formats, PDFs and all sorts. And you've got all the original signatories there as well. Fully available, perfectly readable, public domain, which we like to see, completely open. Now it's entitled an open letter to the Baroness Hallett, chair of the UK COVID inquiry. And this is how they start off. The inquiry must urgently address its apparent biases, assumptions, impartiality, and lack of an evidence-based approach. What is the point in having an inquiry if it's not evidence-based? Well, how would you like it to have been? Who tittle-tattled what to who? No, give us the evidence. What is the evidence here? And this is what we're sadly lacking. To tell you the truth, I did start watching it all quite meticulously at the start of it, but it got on my nerves so much. I'm sort of just dipping in and out of bits now. But this letter is very revealing. Now, their first point that they're making here, I think there's 5 main points that they make. The inquiry gives the impression of being fundamentally biased at a fundamental level. What is going on with the British government here? There has been little opportunity for petitions to be brought by those who have suffered from the negative effects of the pandemic policy decisions. And of course, we have looked at many of those as we've made videos over the past few years. This is preventing a more holistic assessment of the impacts on population health and well-being. We want holism. We want to look at the whole. This lack of neutrality. Now, this is a government inquiry they're talking about here, and these are the words they say. This lack of neutrality appears to have led to biased reasoning and predetermined conclusions. This is a complete reversal of the scientific process. The scientific process says, well, let's collect some evidence and then see if we can make some conclusions. Here they seem to have some conclusions and say, well, let's get some evidence. You know, what is going on here? But don't take my word for it. These are the precise wordings from the letter. This lack of neutrality appears to have led to biased reasoning and predetermined conclusions, for example, to lock down faster next time. So my question would have been, were lockdowns a good idea? What's the evidence? They seem to take that as an axiomatic assumption that lockdowns were a good idea and then start chit-chatting about it. It really is, in my view, a complete reversal of the scientific process. And as you'll see in a minute, it's costing a fortune. I know in some countries you'll say at least you've got an inquiry in the UK, but probably better no inquiry at all than this. But I'll let you make your mind up on that as we go further. Right, second point. The inquiry is taking key assumptions for granted. Instead of examining and critiquing them in the light of the evidence, which is what we've just said. The consensus position pre-2020 pandemic, the pandemic plans, was that non-pharmaceutical interventions, including lockdowns, had weak evidence of effectiveness and were predicted to cause substantial harm to society, especially if used for prolonged periods of time. So that's what the evidence seemed to say. What did they do? Well, pretty well the opposite of that. And the point is, we had all these chief scientific officers and the chief medical officer standing up there with the Prime Minister telling us this was the best thing to do. And I remember saying at the time, I think we can assume that the Prime Minister is well informed. And it's not that the chief scientific officer and the chief medical officer made this up. You know, we assumed, I naively assumed, that they had teams of experts giving them this information. But it appears a lot of it was simply Wrong. Wrong would be a good word. Inaccurate if you want to be kind. Suboptimal if you want to be even kinder. This informed the initial response to COVID in early 2020, yet the inquiry assumes that these measures are effective and appropriate. Right, so there was questioning in early 2020, but then after that the inquiry just seems to assume that these non-pharmaceutical interventions, the lockdowns and everything, were just appropriate. Obviously it was the right thing to lock down. Obviously we needed to shut everyone down. Obviously we needed to accept all the harms of a lockdown. All we need to argue about in the inquiry is should it have been on the Tuesday or the Wednesday? No, I don't think so. I think much more fundamental questions than that are appropriate. Let's go on. As a result, it downplays the harms to society caused by 2 years of emergency infection control mandates. Yeah, good point. Right, third point. The inquiry lacks impartiality in the section and questioning of expert witnesses. It has given preferential treatment to scientific advisors on SAGE, Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, who of course advise the government. And what surprises me, if these people are real scientists, they would admit they were wrong. But they seem to be doubling down. I've openly admitted I got a lot of things wrong in 2020, even into 2021, believing the authorities. But I've come clean on that. I've admitted that. Time for SAGE members to do the same. That's what proper science is. Admitting your mistakes and moving on. Learning from others. This is how we progress. This is the scientific dialectic. It's given preferential treatment to advisors on SAGE who have a vested interest, again, direct words from these academics, have a vested interest in maintaining the justification for their policy recommendations. Surely vested interest isn't taking precedence over science in the scientific group, in the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies. Surely the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies puts the science as preeminent and their own personal preferences and well-being secondary, doesn't it? I'll let you decide that. These academics seem to be pointing this out as a potential conflict of interest, shall we say. Few scientists with an alternative position have been asked to testify, and the inquiry has been confrontational rather than inquisitorial in the questioning of these views. I mean, I won't embarrass anyone, but I could off the cuff name half a dozen top flight world scientists. Top world scientists, many of whom we've had the privilege of interviewing on our channel, who could give counter-argument, but this counter-argument appears to be being attacked by the inquiry. Why would they do that if they're independent? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. The inquiry has been confrontational rather than inquisitorial in questioning of these counter-narrative views, shall we say. The inquiry has not seriously questioned the hypothesis and assumptions offered to government, especially from government-appointed modellers, which were used to justify COVID policy. I mean, if one of the complete travesties of this pandemic has been the emphasis put on modelling. Basically, a few equations, or be it run through a bit of a computer, but why not stand up and say, look, tell you what, these models were wrong. Let's refine them for the future, or let's get rid of models altogether until we've got a decent computer that can do these things properly with decent modellers who can do this job properly. And until then, let's rely on empiricism. What is happening in the real world? Because that's what science is, it's what happens in the real world. That's what we need to get back to, the nature of physical reality. Neither is it to seriously examine the social and economic costs of lockdown. They were astronomical. It has also stuck to the agenda of the UK exceptionalism, failing to recognise the experience elsewhere in the world. So it's just looking at the UK and saying, well, this is true for the UK. But can we not learn something from other countries? Sweden, for example. Have we nothing to learn from Sweden? Well, maybe we have something to learn from Sweden. Maybe the inquiry should address that. Fourth, The format of the inquiry is impending investigation into the key scientific and policy questions, the format. Now, the thing here is, and this really gets on my nerves, the format is legal. All the big cheeses in it seem to be lawyers. Well, what's wrong with doctors? What's wrong with scientists? Virologists, epidemiologists, social scientists, I hate to say it, ordinary citizens. Why is it done like a legal thing? All the legal beagles making a lot of money. What about getting some doctors in? What about getting some scientists in? What about getting some sociologists in? What about getting some more psychologists in? Or what about getting people in with common sense? That would be a good idea, wouldn't it? Anyway, back to the precise wording, not me ranting on. The inquiry has adopted a legal format that presents a systematic evaluation of the evidence that prevents a systematic evaluation. That's exactly what we want. We want a systematic evaluation of the biomedical evidence, but we're not getting it. So the format prevents a systematic evaluation of the evidence by biomedical and social scientists on the harms of restrictions to the British public. The impact on COVID from policies such as mandatory non-pharmaceutical interventions, MPIs, and the state of evidence for best practice. Let's get the people who know about these things. I'm not going to name names, but people we've had on this channel, for example, who know what they're talking about, who could provide much better, more objective information, rather than just legalese. It is focused on who did or said what, rather than asking fundamental scientific questions. Let's ask the basic, fundamental scientific questions, not tittle-tattle. That's what we want. I don't really care who kissed who in what cupboard. That's up to them. Albeit breaking lockdown restrictions, or who went to visit his girlfriend on the other side of town for unknown purposes, albeit breaking COVID restrictions that they themselves had introduced. Not too interested in that, really. What we want is fundamental scientific questions. Yet the investigating the interplay between harms, benefits and best practice is critical to preparing for the next pandemic. This is why this is important. We have to analyse these things so we are ready for the next pandemic. Now, some people might have a next pandemic in mind. How could we possibly know that? But even without surreptitious activity going on, another pandemic is inevitable, completely inevitable. Let's hope it's not for a long, long time. We can reduce the chances of it quite significantly by not fiddling around with new viruses in laboratories quite as much as is being done at the moment. But even without that, there will be another pandemic at some stage, and we need to be ready for it. And this inquiry is not basically helping us very much at all. Investigating the interplay between harms, benefits and best practice is critical preparing for the next pandemic. The inquiry, as currently functioning, appears unsuited to this task of national importance. It almost sounds like they're saying it's not fit for purpose. Not fit for purpose. But when I was at work, if someone was not fit for purpose, that was as bad as it got. I once gave a lesson and my boss said, I've had a report this lesson wasn't fit for purpose. And what? Lesson wasn't fit for purpose? Dear me, it turned out there was a mistake. It was actually. But it's the worst thing that can happen, not to be. What is the point of a process without a product? A process without a product is a complete waste of time. Right, it's not doing its job. Fifth, briefly, the inquiry risks reducing public trust. Now, do you think the inquiry risks reducing public trust? I think that might be slightly reduced already, Maybe just a little bit. But I think public trust might be somewhere down in our boots rather than where it should be up at brain level. If in the impartiality and independence, government accountability and oversight. So there's a lack of trust in the impartiality and independence of government accountability and oversight. I must say I am somewhat lacking trust in government independence, accountability and oversight. And I know a lot of you are as well, and this applies to whichever jurisdiction you live in, whichever country you're in. Size and cost, by some estimates, 3 to 5, again, for £500 million. Senior lawyers don't come cheap. Let's get a few more doctors and scientists in. They might be a bit cheaper. We'll make it the largest public inquiry ever undertaken to date, and yet its shortcomings, if not addressed, risk compromising the credibility of future public inquiries. Yes, correct. We believe the inquiry has a significant, important mission, and we would like to see it succeed. However, if it is to do so, these shortcomings need to be urgently addressed. Do you think they will be? Do you think the government's going to take any notice of this? Do you think the inquiry is going to take any notice of this, or do you think it will just carry on in its own sweet way, doing its own sweet thing? Is it going to listen to these academics or not? Let me know what you think in the comments. It needs to be urgently addressed. The inquiry must invite a much broader range of scientific experts with more critical viewpoints. Critical viewpoints like, you know what, those modelling things from Imperial College and Professor Neil Ferguson were complete rubbish. Now, I'm not saying that's true, but it's a possible hypothesis. And then that could be argued, could be debated. Fundamental questions, fundamental debates, not rearranging a few deck chairs on a sinking ship. So a much broader range of scientific experts must also review the evidence on these diverse topics so that it can be fully informed of relevant science and the economic and social cost of COVID policies to the British public. We, the undersigned, believe that this is an urgent national priority and fundamental to ensuring that future pandemic responses is evidence-based and maximising the health and well-being of all, and I would add maintaining any credibility to phenomenally expensive government processes in general. But that's just me adding that bit. We, the undersigned, are a group of UK public health scholars and academics in related disciplines, widely published in our fields, highly credible academics, deeply concerned that the COVID inquiry is not living up to its mission to evaluate the mistakes made during the pandemic, whether COVID measures were appropriate, and to prepare the country for the next pandemic. Now, here we have the signatories drafted by these well-known academics. These are the signatories, and as I said, I can think of at least another, a heck of a lot more that could go onto that list. But well done to these academics who've signed that. A lot more would and could. It should really be put up for public signature, this. That's what I'd like to see. Then hoi polloi, like me and you could sign it. But the fact that all these leading academics have signed it is very encouraging, and is really encouraging for independent academia, the vestiges of which we still have in the United Kingdom, although it is under attack all around the world. But that's the topic for another video. For now, government inquiry, get your act together. We await a response to this superbly worded letter, and thank you to all those who penned the letter and signed it, and thank you for watching.